Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Before we bring on tonight's guest, I've got some encounters I want to read for you. The first encounter happened in Polk County, Florida. Okay, so I'm just going to start off by saying that this isn't my personal encounter. This happened to my mother and uncle when they were children. I know that the three encounters that were shared with me in rich detail have all been in the years that ended with a 7. That in no way is referencing the song by Steve Cook. The encounter I'm about to tell you about happened in Lakeland, Florida in 1977. My mom was 6 and my uncle was a few years younger than her. My grandparents were passing through and a friend of theirs let them spend the night in a vacant house that their friends owned. I'm guessing this was in the spring or summer because the windows were wide open with bug screens on the windows. My grandmother was out in front of the house taking care of my youngest uncle who was still a baby. My grandfather was reportedly using the bathroom at the time. My mom and uncle were in the back room playing. She said the window that was in the room was very high. Imagine the windows that would be in a basement, except this was an upper floor window. If you were outside, the window would be about 10 to 12 feet off the ground, so the window was pretty high. My mom said that as she and my uncle were playing, a huge hairy paw with long claws reached up to the window and grabbed the screen. It then dragged its claws down diagonally across the screen. Needless to say, they were scared poopless. They thought it was my grandfather just playing a cruel prank on them, so they barged out of the room and headed straight to the front of the house. They found my grandmother and demanded to know where my grandfather was. She told them that he was in the bathroom, but the two of them didn't believe her. So they marched to the bathroom, opened the door, and when they did, my grandfather was sitting there on the toilet in the middle of doing his business. The window in the bathroom was similar to that of the room the two of them had been in. So in all honesty, he wouldn't have had time to climb out of the window, climb back up, and get back on the toilet. My grandparents both thought the two of them were just freaking out about nothing at the time. Grandma said she remembered the pair being horrified though. So they went out the next morning and what do you know? There were scratches on the outside wall of the house and the window screen was torn up. I'm 17 now. My mom is 46, so this was a long time ago when this happened. Even though it's been such a long time, whenever Mom tells the story, she gets scared and terrified talking about what she saw. So there's almost no refuting what she saw and the things she described. Signed, Connor Hall. Time, 10 p.m. Date, midsummer of 1977. The next encounter took place in Washington County, Minnesota. It was the summer of 1997 and I was 13 years old. I was rollerblading from a part of town called Old Cottage Grove. I guess I should start off by saying that the city this happened in was a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota called Cottage Grove. It was about 9:30 p.m. and I was rollerblading back home from a girlfriend's house with a friend. We were just coming around a bend in the road that went past a farm that I believe at the time was called Green Acres Farm. I'm not exactly sure what it was they did at that farm, but I do know for sure at the time there were always cattle there of all different ages, sizes, and genders, which brings me to the conclusion that maybe I was just at the right place at the wrong time. As I was rounding the bend in the road to start coming up the hill, I felt a very strong sense of fear. It was like my body was telling me to get the heck out of there, yet I couldn't figure out why. I can tell you this much though. For the first and only time in my life, I felt like I was no longer at the top of the food chain. Right when I started to pick up the pace to get out of there is when I heard a sound that came from the fenced-in cattle farm to my left, maybe 15 to 20 yards behind me. It sounded like nails grabbing a pole or fence, and then what sounded like what a dog's paws and claws sound like when walking or running on a tile floor, except this sounded just like a quick leap on the street's pavement. As I turned around to look, there stood what looked to be a wiry gray-haired werewolf. It was like time stopped. There was a street light at the time in the woods, maybe 5 feet behind it, so all I could make out was a silhouette of this monster. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with the head of what looked like a German shepherd with huge ears and a huge muzzle. I could see this thing was built like a bodybuilder. It stood bipedal like a man, not like what some folks say with these things having dog-like limbs. It had long, slim hands with black nails on its fingertips. It had a slim waist, but its upper body was muscular beyond belief. The thing that always struck me, besides the point of seeing this thing in the first place, was that his head was turned to the side and snout up in the air. The one thing that really stuck out and was out of place to me was that I could see this thing's breath as though it was winter time, but mind you, it was the end of June, almost July. It looked as though it was smelling my scent, but that's just what it looked like. I'm not positive on that. Before I knew it, I was yelling to my friend to get the heck out of there and not to look back, but it's almost as though he was in another world because he didn't seem to feel, let alone see, what I had just experienced. I'm somewhat of an artist and drew a picture of what I saw, which was a werewolf. Fast forward 17 years later and I still hadn't told anyone about this encounter. That is, until my oldest brother and I were trading stories one summer evening, and it just sort of came up as we were talking about Bigfoot. Mind you, my brother's a firm believer in this animal, so I said the heck with it and started telling him about what happened to me, going to the point of pulling out the original drawing I had drawn of it. To my surprise, he didn't look at me or laugh at me like I was positive he would have. Instead, he started asking me if I had ever heard of the Michigan Dogman or seen anything on it, which I replied no. He then pulled up an image on the internet of a sketch that an eyewitness had drawn, and I swear to you, it sent shivers down my spine. Because it not only looked like my drawing, it looked exactly like the thing I saw that night in the summer of 1997 in Old Cottage Grove, Minnesota. To this day, I still find myself trying to wrap my head around what I saw. I'm 33 years old now, yet still find myself trying to rationalize what I crossed paths with that night. It feels good to get this out there and somewhat off my chest. I hope someone finds something helpful in this experience, and I hope this sort of thing never happens again. Signed, Anonymous. Time, 9:30 p.m. Date, June 28th of 1997. The next encounter took place in Worcester County, Massachusetts. Back in 2004, my husband and I were given 3 of our grandchildren to raise. They were boys aged 1.5, 3, and 4.5 years old. The boys were followed a few months later by their sister, a newborn, who was also given to us to raise. After having raised our children, my husband and I found ourselves as new parents. We lived in a small town in New England, so small that you could step out of the house and see the police station, fire department, and post office just beyond the house. When I was young, we had stop signs downtown where there are now stoplights. My grandmother and father were born there, and I lived 6 decades in that town. It was the kind of place where if you needed some vegetables for supper, you went to a neighbor who had a garden, took what you needed, and left the money on their front porch. We lived on the main street but were surrounded by many forested acres. 3 rivers run through the town, and we had a large field behind our house. There were many fields throughout the town, and other towns nearby were similar in makeup. There were also farms in the area and in neighboring towns too. They were very New England-type towns, small, comfy, and cozy. When the children first came to live with us, both my husband and I worked. He worked at a transit company in a local city, and I worked as a paralegal. My job was a 4-hour commute, 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours at night. I'd be gone from the house for 12 hours a day at a minimum. I often worked on weekends too. My husband took a leave of absence from his job and stayed home with the children for 2.5 years. When he returned to work, he worked the night shift. That enabled him to watch the children during the day. He did his best with the children while I was at work, and given the circumstances, he did a good job. One day after work, when the youngest children were 6 and 4 respectively, I came home to find the house in a state of disarray. Supper hadn't been made, and the kids were running to me with quite a story about a big gorilla that had been outside that day. The 2 youngest let me know that during the afternoon they saw a big gorilla in front of the house running along the street. They said it was very fast. Then, the big gorilla jumped our picket fence and ran into our yard. The children said they had their noses pressed against the window pane and that the big gorilla came up to the window, growled at them, and then pushed its paw against the window. The children said they tried to wake up my husband, but he had fallen asleep on the couch and they couldn't rouse him. The big gorilla then ran into the backyard where it broke some car windows and threw about some trash cans. I didn't disbelieve the children, I was just too exhausted to deal with it and responded with my "that's nice" comment that I used for anything I couldn't handle at the moment. I do recall reading in the newspaper a few days later that the police were warning folks about vehicle damage, but I never gave that any further thought. I didn't give it any further thought even though a few years prior to the big gorilla incident, I had seen a very large dead wolf that I presumed had been hit by a car laying on the roadside. It wasn't a coyote nor was it a coy dog that we had in the area. I had seen pictures of wolves and this one was immense. I had personally seen coy dogs while riding my horse along the trails. The wolf body was gone the next day and no mention by authorities of any wolf sightings was in the newspapers. I thought that was sort of unusual. Did we have wolves in our area? Wouldn't that be newsworthy? Did anyone else see this wolf? Obviously someone had, as its body was gone the following day. I also didn't give the big gorilla story much further thought even though years before the children came, both my husband and I had witnessed large dog-type footprints in our backyard. We mentioned those prints to a friend of ours, the animal control officer in a nearby town, who didn't seem too surprised with our find. However, we never discussed anything further. I didn't give the big gorilla story much thought either, even though at about the time we saw the dog prints in our backyard, our cats had started to go missing. I found one of our cats, Peter, the best hunter in town, high up on my neighbor's roof. The house was 3 stories with the first floor and second occupied by tenants and the third an attic. Lots of those older homes in New England always had full attics. I called to Peter, managed to enter the building, and climbed to the second floor with a clothes basket. I climbed onto the porch railing, put the basket above my head and up to the house gutters, and Peter obligingly dropped in. Thankfully, we managed to save our wonderful cat. Even one of our friends asked why Peter was up on the roof. Peter wasn't scared of anything, but I still wasn't connecting the dots. Back to the big gorilla story. When the children got a little older, we moved to North Carolina. It was in North Carolina when the children were near teen years that I found your Dogman Encounters program on YouTube. I listened intently to narratives on your program. Recently, while driving down the street, I connected the dots. The idea of it jolted my brain awake. Wait a minute, I thought. Did they say big gorilla and something very fast when the children told me their story? Did the children have an encounter with something those years back? I immediately spoke with our 12-year-old and 14-year-old separately. Do you remember the time you told me the story about the big gorilla? The 12-year-old energetically told me every single thing she remembered. The animal was very large and very fast. It had black hair and a long bushy tail. It growled and had paws with fingers. It had stood up and pushed on the window with those paws. It ran very fast and had jumped over the fence. It had run into the backyard and made a lot of noise breaking things. The 12-year-old said it didn't have the face of a gorilla or a monkey, but she couldn't tell me more about the face because of the hair. The 14-year-old shivered when I asked if he remembered it. He said he would never forget that thing coming into the yard. He remembers it clearly as if it were yesterday. He too remembers the swiftness of the creature, the black hair on it, and how it jumped the fence and was running amok from the front to the backyard. He said he doesn't know what it was and still doesn't, but that he hopes never to see anything like it again. The children now know about dogmen, Bigfoot, and other cryptids. They didn't when they saw the big gorilla though. Neither did I. We've all received an education from listening to your program. We're aware that dogmen don't always stay in the forests. They're often seen among neighborhoods. And perhaps, just perhaps, the creature my children saw those years ago was just that. A dogman in a small New England town. Signed, Anonymous. Time, 12 p.m. Date, summer of 2009. The last encounter I'm going to share with you took place in Burnett County, Wisconsin. This encounter happened many years ago when I was 15 years old. I only recently started reading information on the internet describing this creature and now have a desire to tell my story. This encounter happened at my grandparents' lake cabin south of the town of Danbury, Wisconsin, east of Highway 35 around Devil's Lake. My background has always been the great outdoors, playing and exploring in the woods. During this time period, I was very comfortable going out by myself for all-day adventures. On the night of this encounter, I had gone to sleep around 10 p.m. It was in the summer, so no school. This night was warm, so I had the bedroom window slightly cracked for some air circulation and to hear the crickets and outside noises. This always would put me to sleep every time because, like I said earlier, I was very comfortable in the woods and nothing was out of the ordinary that night. Now at the time, my grandparents' bedroom was on the other side of the cabin. They also had a black Labrador retriever that usually slept in the room with me. That fact will come into play later on. I had fallen asleep like I always did at this cabin. Hours later, I never knew exactly what time it was, but it was late and everyone was asleep. I suddenly awoke feeling something was wrong. Being still groggy, the first thing I noticed was that nothing outside was making any noise at all. No crickets, no frogs, no whippoorwills. Nothing but total silence. I held my breath for a minute, listening very intently, thinking that was very odd. I moved my head to see the door of the bedroom. The nightlight from the hallway was giving a slight glow, and I could see that my grandparents' dog was not laying in his normal spot on the floor or any place in my room. I guess maybe 2 to 3 minutes had passed, and then I heard it. A sound that to me sounded like a raccoon or some other animal scratching the outside of the cabin. This continued, and my mind wondered what the heck could have been making that noise. It was still totally silent except that scratching noise that began to move down the wall closer to the window of my bedroom. So I turned my attention to the window. It was very dark outside, but I could still make out the slight silhouette of the trees and the branches up high. All at once, the scratching stopped. I strained to adjust my eyes, and that's when it stepped out of the shadows and blocked out the view of the trees. It was huge. No animal I knew of or could envision was standing in my view. I couldn't make out any features of its body, but I could see the distinct ears of a canine on a large head. Then I saw its eyes and was paralyzed with fear. It was hunched down, looking in the window. Its eyes were glowing amber color and blinked every 10 to 15 seconds. My mind was racing. Can it see me? What's it gonna do? What am I gonna do? A chill went down my spine. I could hear it breathing. It let out an exhale that was deep but not overly loud. Then it began to sniff the air. I could hear it clearly, only being around 10 to 12 feet away from it. About 30 seconds elapsed, which felt like forever to me, but looking back, it was not much time at all. The creature then began to show its teeth, almost like a grin of satisfaction that it had scared me so badly. Time stood still, then it stood up off its haunches, erect like a man, and walked off away from the window in the direction of the lake. I knew this was my chance, so I jumped off the bed into the hallway away from the window and began to breathe heavy because I think I held my breath for over 2 minutes. I looked into the living room and could see the dog standing totally still in a rigid posture, hair standing on end with a slight growl looking at the deck window. I turned to the hall closet and grabbed my 20-gauge shotgun and loaded it. It was only a single shot, but it was better than nothing, I thought to myself while I was trying to catch my breath. Then I realized if it wanted to come into the house, it could easily do that by breaking the glass on the deck patio. If it did that, I had no place to go because I was trapped in between my bedroom and that patio window to my grandparents' room where my grandfather had a deer rifle that I couldn't get to. I stood waiting for around 5 minutes and nothing happened. The dog seemed to calm down and walked over to me and sat down, wanting to get his head scratched. I thought about waking up my grandparents and telling them what I had seen, but at the time didn't think they would believe me. After all, I couldn't believe it myself, so I calmed down and went back into my bedroom, pulled the covers off the bed, and slept on the floor with the gun and dog at the ready and a half sleep for the rest of the night. This encounter had scared me so bad I didn't want to even get close to the window to close it all the way that night for fear of that thing coming back. I waited until dawn before I closed and locked it. Once daylight was in full force, I went outside to see if I could find any scratches on the wall or anything else like footprints. I didn't find anything at all and was starting to wonder if I was going crazy. No, that thing was real. I continued to sleep on the floor for around a week before I felt it was okay to sleep in my bed again, but that window stayed closed and locked ever since. I didn't have any other encounters with a dogman after that incident, and the memory was put out of my mind over time until recently. I was reading encounters on your website and saw that 2 other people had an encounter in the same area as me. When I saw their encounters, I decided to share my experience. You don't know what true primal fear is until you see one of these things and are face to face with one. I never want to experience that again. Signed, Anonymous. Time, 2 a.m. Date, July of 1984. Thanks everyone for submitting those reports. I really appreciate it. Alright everyone, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Drew. Drew, welcome to the show.
Thank y'all for having me. It's really a pleasure.
Oh, it's great having you. Drew, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm 20 years old. I'm an outdoorsman, country boy, here from small town USA, Madison County, Georgia.
You just mentioned that you're an outdoorsman. Before you had your encounter, how much time did you spend in the woods and what kind of things did you do in the woods?
Well, beforehand, I've always been in the woods my whole life. My dad is a very big hunter and fisherman, so I've always been outdoors, hunting, fishing, exploring as a kid. I would say I've been in the outdoors a whole lot throughout my life, mainly just hunting, fishing, just going out there to think really and observe nature. It's really peaceful around where I live, so it's a good place to go to clear my head and think about things.
Yeah, the woods is a great place to go out and do those sorts of things. After you had your encounters, how much did that change? Do you still head out into the woods now, or have you pretty much given that up?
Well, after I had my encounter, it's really changed a lot of things. For example, I'm a big hunter, and a big popular thing to do in deer hunting is be in the woods at dark, leave after dark. Now, I won't go in the woods anytime, even if it's dusk. It has to be plenty of daylight for me to go in. And also, it's made me realize that, hey, I'm not the top predator out here no more. I'm not number one. It's really took a toll on my activities, my days out in the woods. So it's really changed my perspective a lot.
Yeah, having a dogman encounter tends to do that. Your changes in behavior are pretty much in line with most eyewitnesses who have dogman encounters, so don't feel bad about those changes. Before you had your encounter, how would you describe your interest in cryptids like dogmen or Sasquatch?
Well, I've always been fairly interested in it. I wouldn't really call myself a believer, but I've always entertained the idea that stuff like that could be out there. In my opinion, it's been too well documented. There's been too much evidence, and you've just heard too many stories of things like that for it to be made up. This is something, that's been recorded since man's first day. So I do believe that they're out there, and now I know, but I've always entertained them to be a good possibility.
I like that open mind that you've got. That's impressive. Did you know what dogmen were before you had your encounters?
I did not. I heard the term once or twice before, and I've always thought of werewolves and things like that, not necessarily dogmen. So, no, I really didn't have a whole lot of information before the encounter on what they were. So it kind of left me out into a blank there when I seen it.
I see. Well, that makes sense. I get the impression that after you did have those encounters, that all changed and you found out quite a bit, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. I definitely started researching. At first, I really didn't know what to look for, what to look up. But after scavenging the web and the library, I eventually started to come across dogmen, and it was a more popular thread there on the internet, and so I really began my studying there, and I did end up finding out quite a bit through some research I did.
Well, thank goodness there's so much more information on dogmen available on the internet now than there used to be. Talking about that, when you started reading all this information about dogmen, did that make matters worse for you or better?
It depended on what time of the day. At night, it really more or less scared me and made things worse. During the daytime, I guess I felt like I was safer during the day, but at night I just felt completely vulnerable and defenseless.
I can understand that. It would most people. You do understand that most Dogman encounters happen during daylight hours, not at nighttime, so by heading out into the woods during daylight hours, you're not protecting yourself. You do understand that, don't you?
I do. I've always known things like that could be out there, and I know I'm not protected by any means, but at least during the daytime, I know that I can see it coming, and I don't feel as defenseless as I would at night. At nighttime, especially in the woods, if you've ever been in the woods at night, you have limited seeing. It's really hard to hear because there's so much going on, bugs and stuff. So in the daytime, even though I know I'm not protected, I just have a more secure feeling about myself.
Yeah, that does make good sense. I can see where you're coming from. Your encounters happened on your property. It must have been so much more difficult for you to deal with because it happened at home versus miles away from home.
Oh, yeah, it definitely took a toll on things. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't come out of the house for the first day or two. I mean, it really took some doing to get me out. The fact that it did happen here at home, it makes you feel defenseless. It makes you feel weak. This is where you go to rest. This is your place. This is your zen. And the fact that something like this is here, it really upsets the nature of things around you. When it happened here, it changed me completely. I would come home now before dark. I won't be outside after dark. It really changes things. It changes your whole perspective.
Yeah, it does have a tendency of doing that, no doubt about that. Your property's in Madison County, Georgia. Please tell us what the area around your property's like.
Well, Madison County is a very big agricultural area. My property specifically, it's a wooded field. And a lot of people are probably wondering what a wooded field is. It's a field that has several trees in it, but it's not entirely a forest. And that area around my house is mainly like that. So to an extent, there's the field with the trees, and then you have some deep hardwoods towards the back of my property. And also you have a creek and stuff running along through there. So around where my house and my shop is, you know, you can see down into the hardwood woods because it's a wooded field, but through there it's pretty heavily wooded forest.
Well, it sure sounds to me like a really pretty place.
Yes, sir, it is. It's a very beautiful place, and I love it here. The only thing is, though, is now that this has happened, it's just that extreme sense of paranoia, that fear that's just always lurking in the back of my mind.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a good chance that fear's always going to be there. As time goes by, you're going to be able to deal with it better and better, but in a lot of cases, the fear is always there nonetheless. All right, Drew, please tell us about your encounters. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
All righty, will do. I got home that night. It was about 10 o'clock. I was inside my house. I'm a radio operator, and I was actually programming some radios for a friend of mine. Well, as time went on, I noticed my cell phone battery had started dying, and I realized I left my phone charger outside plugged up in my car. So naturally, I slipped on my shoes, walked outside to my car, and now where my car is and where my house is, I have a shop in between my car and my house. I park on the other side of my house down by the field. From my house, you cannot actually see the field. So as I walk around the shop, I get into my car, I'm rummaging around, and I get my phone charger. I seen the motion sensor light click on, which it didn't bother me or anything. I knew it was me out there. Well, then I stood up with my flashlight because I thought I heard something, and I took a brief scan of the area, and then all of a sudden it just hit me right there. It was like the sense of I was being watched. An extreme chill went down my spine. A very big fear gripped me. Something's watching me. Something's out here. And I got to looking, and about 50 to 70 yards away from me, I thought I seen movement. So I shined my light over there, and that's when I saw it. There was a tree. The tree's about 2 foot wide, and I noticed something was kind of hiding behind the tree, looking around, peering around. Then it peered its head around, and I noticed right then, and I seen the canine-like snout. Oh, I seen the big broad chest. I seen the height, the claws. Then, out of nowhere, it was like it sent me a telepathic message. It said, stop, and immediately I froze. I dropped my light. I just froze in my tracks. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't do nothing. And looking at this thing, even though it was like 60 to 70 yards away, in my mind, I could almost make out every detail of it. Fear just gripped me. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. When I seen it, it was standing on two legs, propped up against the tree, peering around, and it stood about 6 to 7 foot tall, and it was just poking its head around, looking at me. With bright red eyes. I didn't know what to do. But then the creature, it got down on all fours, and it just calmly and slowly walked off into the dark. I immediately picked up my light, ran into the house, and locked the house, and got in my bed, and I just stayed awake all night, trembling in fear.
That sounds like a rough night to me.
Yes, sir, it was. It definitely took a toll on me that night. I didn't sleep at all.
Well, I can understand that. Who was the first person you shared that encounter with?
I called my best friend, John, and told him about it, and of course, naturally, he thought I was crazy. He thought I was making it up. It was something I was doing. He came over, actually, after I got off the phone with him, and I guess once he seen me and realized how shook up I was and how afraid I was, it dawned on him that I might be telling the truth. So me and him, we went down and investigated the area, looked around. He tried to calm me down. Initially, I did not want to leave the safety of my home. I did not want to go outside. I didn't want to do anything. I was in the house with the doors locked, the window shades down. I did not want to come out of there, but he eventually coaxed me out, and we went out and kind of had a look around the area.
Well, it sounds like he's a really good friend. I'd say he's a keeper.
Yes, sir. Me and him's been knowing each other for a good 10, 11 years or longer, and he's always had my back, even stuff like this where to normal people it might seem like it's crazy.
Yeah, that sounds like a good man to me. You said you got the impression the Dogman sent some kind of a telepathic message to you when you were standing there looking at it. How sure are you that you didn't just imagine that maybe it didn't actually have anything to do with the feeling that it was trying to communicate with you that way?
Well, when it sent that message to me in my mind, I was sitting there and I had my light shined right on. I had a bright LED flashlight I used for hunting. When it did that, there's no doubt, it was like a thought kind of was in my mind that wasn't mine, if that makes any sense. It was something put that there. It wasn't me. It wasn't of me. It was something completely different. It's really hard to explain, but it was just something. It was just, bam, it's there. It wasn't something I imagined up. It wasn't my brain. It was a completely different experience.
I see. As you've been studying Dogman, did you ever come across other eyewitnesses who talked about getting the same feeling that the Dogman they encountered was somehow sharing some kind of a telepathic message with them as well?
No, I didn't. I kind of thought myself to be crazy with that idea more than the encounter. I hadn't heard of that before. Like I said, I really hadn't studied a whole lot into it before the encounter. So I really didn't know that was a popular thing for dogmen to do until afterwards, but that was the hardest part for me, was telling people, well, you and John, was, hey, I think this thing tried to communicate with me. I got this thing in my mind, this message. It really took me through a loop there because I didn't know if I was going crazy or what it was.
Well, I can understand you feeling that way when you experience something like that, and to be honest, I can't explain it. I don't know what to say about it, but I can tell you that what you just shared about that sensation, it is definitely not unprecedented. A lot of eyewitnesses have shared that feeling before, so maybe there's something to it, I don't know, but yeah, you're definitely not the first person to report that sort of thing. You went back to the location of your encounter the next day and had another experience. Please tell us what happened that day.
Well, it was right after John left. John stayed with me most of that day. He got into his car and he went on home, and I convinced myself that you need to get over this. You're acting childish. This is something you need to get over, which, looking back on, wasn't the brightest decision, wasn't the most well thought out strategy, but it was what I did. I went back down there into the wooded area there, And it had done started getting dark. The sun had already started to set, and it was real dusky out. You could still see, but you could know the sun was going down. It was fixing to be dark. It was about 7:30. And when I went down there, I just got that heavy feeling, that same fear that gripped me the first time, just like something was watching me. And I turned and I looked through the privet edge down there, and I thought I seen a pair of eyes watching me. But at that point, though, I wasn't sure if did I just see another one or if it was my mind playing tricks on me. But one thing I knew was for real was that feeling of being watched and that fearful sensation again. The chills on my arms running up and down my spine. I knew that to be real, and I went as quick as I could back up to the house.
Yeah, sounds like that was a pretty wise move to get out of there. After you had your second encounter in as many days, did you think about moving?
The thought crossed my mind. I really wanted to get out of here, wanted to get out of the area, but financially I wasn't able to do so, so I had to make a decision in there, and it was part of my process of really getting over this ordeal in some ways was you need to stay your ground and accept. These are things of nature. These are things, no matter where you go, these things may very well be there too. This is not something you can run from. You need to stand your ground and try to get over this as best as possible and try to live in harmony with this if you ever come across these things again.
Well, it goes without saying, I definitely like your outlook on all this. Easier said than done, but it sounds like you're doing it, and that's impressive. Before you had your encounter, had anything happened to tip you off that a large, strange creature might have been hanging around your property?
Yes, sir. I haven't lived here but about 6 months. It's a split driveway, so the people on the other side of me here, before you get down to my property, they have said as long as they've lived here, and that's been since 1983, that there's been so much deer, so much coyote, and just wild game in the area. It's always been unreal. And ever since I moved in, about 6, 7 o'clock every morning, you could see deer out in the backyard down there in the field. And there's been plenty of squirrels. There's been coyotes. It's just been a very beautiful place to be, especially for outdoorsmen like myself. But about a month and a half before the encounter, I noticed the deer started coming in later. Then it got to where they weren't coming in at all. The biggest thing that set me off was coyotes. We used to have some really bad coyote problems around here because there's chicken houses and goats, stuff like that up the road. So it's natural for them to be around, but it was nothing. No coyotes. Squirrels virtually disappeared. The deer disappeared altogether. And me being a hunter, I knew that there was probably a top predator in the area. Of course, I thought it may have been a bear. There's been some bear sightings around that time period. And that's originally what I thought it was. But once I seen it that night, I knew then there's no way this is a black bear. And I knew exactly what it was.
It sounds like food wouldn't be a problem for them with all the farms in your area, but do you have any moving water nearby?
I do. There's a creek that runs. If you go past my property and down through that heavily wooded area I was talking about, there's actually a pretty good-sized creek that runs down through there, and it actually comes out into a lake. And once you go past the lake, there's a farm on the other side of that. They raise Black Angus cattle. And another thing, just throwing it in there, right before I moved in, which was about 7 months ago, a farmer had lost a cow, and she had been laying at the bottom of a hill, and this is a pretty steep hill. I mean, it's just about to a point where you can't drive up this hill. It's that steep. And the cow had been laying at the very bottom of the field. He was going to bury her the next day. Well, the next day he presented himself to go out there and bury her with the tractor. The carcass was moved up top of the hill and looked like it had been eaten by something, which we all naturally suspected a bear. And that's the first thing that came to mind when he told me that. But the moving water and all cuts right through his property. There's a big creek and his lake and everything down through there.
Food, water, cover, it sounds like they've got everything they need to thrive.
Yes, sir. Like I said, as an outdoorsman, my outlook on it, more than a person, just as my outdoor opinion, is this is a predator's paradise. You got really thick, heavy woods, which they can hunt in without being seen, which is a big predator thing. You got the fields which are open but high grass, and you've got the water, so you got the water supply. Water brings in the prey. It's just a predator's paradise where I'm at. And Madison County being as rural as it is, so wooded, so open and fielded, it's really a wonder these things ain't been spotted in this area before, or if they have, people wouldn't talk about them. But it's just really a great area for a big predator like them to survive.
Well, it sure sounds that way to me. Have you done anything to improve the safety of your family now that you know dogmen might be on or around your property at any time?
We have talked about not going out at night, staying closer to the house, not going into the woods by ourselves anymore. But as far as defense-wise, other than that, I really haven't. After getting a look at that thing and seeing that night, there's really no way you can prepare yourself to defend against something like that. I mean, that is nature's perfected predator built to kill. I really don't know, unless you just happen to have an armory at your house, if there is a great way to defend against them. The only way I would know would be a loudspeaker or an air horn or something like that.
Yeah, as far as defending yourself against them, your options are definitely pretty limited, unfortunately. Your dad used to walk you through the woods after dark to help cure your fear of the dark. Are you having problems now again with the dark after having those encounters?
Yes, actually I am. It don't bother me so much now to step outside, which is actually where I'm at now, looking down to where it happened, but being out right there at my house, it don't bother me as much being out at dark. But as far as roaming off through the woods and going out to a lake at night and going fishing and stuff like that, it definitely put a stop to it. I don't want to be anywhere where I can't immediately get to cover at night. I want to be right there next to the door, right there next to a vehicle or somewhere like that. I don't want to be out in the open away from everything. So it's definitely re-sparked that fear.
No, I'm sure it did, and none of that makes you any different than a lot of eyewitnesses, so I can understand fully. Have your encounters strengthened your belief in the existence of Sasquatch?
Yes, actually it has. It's kind of funny how if you believe one thing, the others seem to fall into place, and that's kind of what happened. Is without a doubt in my mind, I know what I saw that night, and I know now that they're real. It really makes you wonder and question, why can't this be real? It's got to be. Like I said earlier, it's too well recorded, it's too well documented, there's too much evidence for it not to believe. So yes, I'm definitely on board with Sasquatch. He could be out there, and I'm sure with enough research and time, we're going to end up finding out for 100% he is real.
We'll see. Time will tell. Well, Drew, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yes, sir, actually I do. For all the listeners out there, if you're like me, you're stubborn and might think people are going to call you crazy, but I'm going to tell you from firsthand experience, the best thing you can do if you do encounter a dogman to get over that is to talk with someone you trust, not someone who will judge and ridicule you, someone that is open-minded. Talk with them and share that experience. That's the best way to get over it, is to talk about it. And we all know that through just common everyday problems. You can't bottle something like that up and keep it inside. You've got to talk about it and get it out of you. That's the best way to get over it.
Well, that's well said. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight and sharing those experiences with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. The pleasure has been all mine. Thank y'all for having me.
Well, it's been great having you, like I said. Well, thanks again so much, and have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.